The Legacy Files with Grant Cameron.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon. You are on the world. This is Grant Cameron, and I'm talking to you from Vancouver, Canada, and my assistant co-author is talking from Ontario. And this is part two of the big story about Donald Trump putting a message on Truth Social that he's going to request all the UFO and UAP files to be released to the public. So we did a first session, and today, this next session, I'm going to talk a little bit about a statement that was made to me in 1991. There was a group of researchers, and we were going after what I think is the highest ranked person ever to talk about UFOs, Dr. Eric Walker, the former president of Penn State University and the former chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, where DARPA and the Jasons came from. And at one point, he made a statement to us and he said, leave it alone. There's nothing you could do about it. And this is this indigestible thing that Jim Semivan talks about. And then he said, let me ask you another question. Admit it, you're just curious. Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? When you figure it out, what are you going to do with it? And that's where we are today. Are in a situation now where we're about to be told, and then it comes down to what's going to happen. Now, what I think is going to happen is that now we're looking at the 1 million questions, the curiosity. That people really, it is true. People are just curious. They just want to know. And once Trump says, okay, it's classified, there's aliens, then everybody says, okay, I know that already. Okay, do you have crafts? Yes, we have crafts. Okay, now I want to know where are they from? Okay, and then you get that, and then okay, why are they here? And it's just question after question after question. And that's all fine if you know what's going on. But Jim Semivan has made an offer to anybody that wants to take him on. He said, I will bet 1 year of my pension salary that we have no clue. We have bodies and crafts, but beyond that, we really don't know very much about what's going on at all. I don't understand this. So now you're in a situation where there really aren't as many answers as people think there are. And now Donald Trump is going to be faced with this. Now he's going to be good at this because it's the same thing as the Epstein files, where he said, it's got nothing to do with me. I've been exonerated. I'm out of it. Nothing to do with me. And all these other people are getting charged. That's too bad. I'm exonerated. And he will put it off on him. And basically, because he was never interested. If you go back to 2016, when Hillary Clinton was going to disclose, and people don't realize this, Hillary Clinton was going to disclose. This was the deal. The plan was that she was going to go after this thing. They said, well, your husband went after it and he didn't get anything. Well, I'm going to do it again, she said. And John Podesta was behind her and he was pushing her to get disclosure and she was going to do this. She lost the election and then they had to sort of retool things. And that's when To the Stars came out and started pushing the disclosure stuff that she was going to do. But the president is the person who has the power to do it. So Donald Trump has sort of made this offer, and now he's in a situation where people are going to start asking questions, and we're going to be into this indigestible thing. So he's not averse to talking about this classified material. I don't know if people realize that he talked about one just a couple of weeks ago, and that was the invasion in Venezuela, the discombobulator. He said they used the discombobulator on the Cuban troops, and I guess it was some sort of thing that totally stuns people, and they can't move or whatever, and then they just shoot them all and they go pick up whoever they are. So he talked about it. He said that's really top secret. I shouldn't be talking about that. So he talked about that, and he's not averse to talking about UFOs, except he still doesn't care. When they asked him about Hillary Clinton in 2016, he said, I assume you're talking about outer space. And then they said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm not interested. And that's how he answered the question. And he's still not interested. And that's one of the reasons I think that Jim Semivan may be right, that we don't have anything, because if they had the technology, it's worth a lot of money. If you see Tim Taylor, the one invention he had, the one with the hip, how to replace the hip without it being rejected by the body and stuff like that. He got that in a download, and he told that to me. And he sold the company. I'm not sure how much of that patent was the company, but the company was between 88 and $100 million on Nasdaq. It was sold for. There's a lot of money involved in this. And if they were had all this technology and they were flying this kind of stuff, you'd think Donald Trump would be into this thing. He'd be buying companies, or he'd be trying to talk to companies. It seems like he just still doesn't have any interest, and he doesn't really realize what there is below this. And he said, even on the interview on after he made the statement about it being classified, he said, "Well, some people talk about it. I'm not interested, but there's other people that think that there's something there, and that's why he's doing it. But he's not interested in what's going on." And I really don't think he is interested. When it comes to this speech by Laura Trump, that's another thing where he had the speech already prepared a couple of weeks ago before he actually made this statement on Air Force One. So what was he going to say in the statement? He said that he wasn't interested. So he's going to say, I don't know if there's aliens or not, but people are wanted or whatever. And so I think we should do something with that would be the speech, but he doesn't really know anything. And if you listen to Michael Wolff, who wrote 4 books on Donald Trump, he said Donald Trump doesn't listen to anybody. So it's not like he's going to, it's almost like impossible to brief him. He said if his statement was if the Joint Chiefs of Staff walk into a meeting room with him with a PowerPoint, Donald Trump is gone in 90 seconds. It just leaves. He has no interest. He has no attention span he knows stuff. He doesn't need to be briefed. And so, this kind of stuff that normally a president uses. But I think what they're going to do now, they're going to show him a way to walk it back in terms of, and he's good at this, is saying it's got nothing to do with me. I just did it for other people. I really don't know what's going on. And you should talk to the Defense Department. You should talk to these guys. And he's going to sort of throw everybody else under the bus to explain this. And as Doty pointed out this morning, they're not going to release classified information. There's absolutely no way they're going to release classified information. And you have the other problem that has been described with disclosure that I think they brought up with I think Danny Sheen was talking about when they're doing a negotiation with the Congress. They had said that they were really upset about the eminent domain clause. And this is the idea that they're going to take all the crafts back, which doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, the reason the crafts are in the contractors' facilities is because if you're gonna, fix your toilet or something that's leaking or whatever, you're not gonna do it yourself. If you don't know how to do it, you're gonna bring in a plumber, and that's what they do. They send it to these people who should know what to do. A congressman doesn't know how to build a flying saucer. The president doesn't know how to build a flying saucer or understand a flying saucer, so they contract this stuff out. So I made the point already on Facebook that Lockheed Martin, who's the one that supposedly was going to give the craft to Bob Bigelow because they couldn't understand the craft. It was conscious. They couldn't do anything with this thing. They were going to give it to Bob Bigelow. Um, Lockheed gave $10 million to Trump for the ballroom. Now, the question is after giving $10 million to the ballroom, do you think there's any chance that Donald Trump is going to take the Lockheed craft away from them and all the research they've done and turn it over to Congress so the Congress can build a flying saucer or the government can build a flying? The government can't build a flying saucer. You're gonna have to do the same thing, is give it back to the contractors. And as Jim Semivan points out, these are all source contracts that are done all the time at CIA. They're done in the military, whatever. Is you go to a company that you think you want to build a secret plane or something. So you go to a company and you say, you build this plane. We will never identify that you work for us, and you can't ever talk about this. And that's the way they do it through this whole deal. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to violate all these contracts that you made and expose the people that you made these contracts with. And that's in the contract. And there's going to be all these lawsuits and stuff. And I don't think for a minute that this is where the majority of Donald Trump's money comes from election, is these big name defense contractors and stuff like this. And there's no way he's going to go in and take their material away from them. He's a capitalist. He believes in eminent domain, that if you got the craft, almost like Bob Bigelow said, he's got rights to the craft because he put in a lot of money to research all this kind of stuff. That's one of the problems you're going to have. And then I guess the indigestible thing that is always talked about by Jim Semivan is he talks about the fact that in the United States, half the people are reading at a grade 6 level. And then he says there's all this stuff that you're going to have to drop, that people don't realize it's not going to be a simple nuts and bolts, they come from Venus type thing. It's going to be very complex. Even what James Lekatsky said in his last interview, he said it is complex. It is very, very complex. And they started to hint, and this is I've done the research. I haven't sent it to Dest already, but I found absolutely bizarre connections between near-death experiences and the craft. And the craft, the story that was told by Jack Sarfati to me was that his friend ran one of the programs, had one of the crafts in a Navy facility on the East Coast of the United States, and they could not get into the craft. And that the craft is alive, it's conscious, and it has its own willpower. And then unless you vibrate at the right level, they ain't opening the door for you. And he managed this guy, he's a scientist, PhD, a physicist, I think, managed to get in the craft. They allowed him in the craft and he flew the craft around inside the hangar. So he's the only guy that got in there. And they talk about this whole deal that this is how you get in the craft. So when James Sikorsky was in an interview, he said in 2011, I had a meeting in a congressional facility, which means that Congress knows that they're telling the Gang of Eight. And he said there's a congressman with me, and that would have been it was agreed that it was Senator Reid, who was then the head of the Senate, the chief guy in the Senate, and he was there, and that they had said we'd gotten into the craft. So you're wondering, like, if this was the Lockheed craft from 1947 or 1950 or whatever, that they only got into it in 2011. And so he mentioned this in the first interview with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, and they didn't pick up on it. But the second interview, they asked the question, how did you get in the craft? And he said, I can't talk about that, which indicates it's not a button you push and it opens the door. It seems to be this thing that the thing is alive and it will open the door if you're vibrating at the right level. So I go to near-death experiences and I have probably 20 near-death experiences where someone says, I was in this building and the building was made out of marble, but it looked like it was alive. And I went in the building and there was all these doors. And the only way you could get in the door was to vibrate at the right level. So people were taking lessons, and depending on what level you're vibrated at, a certain door would open as you went into this building. So
Uh,
this is almost identical to what they're talking about. And that's where this thing is going to come from. And I guess I'll close with this. I think this whole situation is going to be not as easy as people think it is. It has all these complex spiritual elements or non-local elements or metaphysical elements that people don't realize. There's this part about it, and that was in a Canadian government document in 1950 where the Canadians were told that other things might be associated with this flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. The Americans aren't doing very well. They've said if we're working on it, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. So they've known this mental phenomena thing since 1950. And that's the part of the thing that even if I was the president, you can't disclose this because you don't know. You can't put your cards on the table for the Russians and the Chinese when you don't understand the full thing. So you're going to be putting on the table, what have you figured out? And then the Russians who are sitting back and have a big party last night after they heard that the Americans were going to release all their technical material on flying saucers. They must have been just the vodka must have been flowing in the Kremlin in terms of saying, here we go. Didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to spy. They're going to tell us exactly where the crafts are, where they're doing the research and stuff like that. And that's what the part they're going to have to walk back. That's the classified material that they have to protect at all costs because according to the Canadians, what they were told, this is the most highly classified secret in the United States. And I can't see any way they're going to absolutely put it on the table because that's what Walker said. Admit it, you're just curious. Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? That's what's happened now. People are really curious. There's a lot of demand, but it's basically just to know what's going on. We paid the tax. We want to know what's going on. But if you're in the military, you could care less what people think. This is classified material that we can learn to discombobulate the enemy or whatever it is. And we are going to research this and we are not going to give it away. Or they're sitting in the background as scientists and waiting because they realize that if you get one patent on any of this kind of technology, it's worth billions or trillions of dollars.
yeah, absolutely. I just have three quick points of three different things you said. So I remembered that remember Don Jr. I don't know if he has his own podcast, but remember about a year ago,
Yeah.
Don Jr. had his own interview with Trump, and he was saying how interested he was in finding out if UFOs were real or whatever. And so he asked Trump at the time, like I can't even remember what it was, but he said, "Do you think that there's aliens? Or are you going to disclose on the aliens or whatever?" And he said something like, it's very interesting. Whatever I know, I can't tell. It's something like, whatever I know, I can't tell you, but I will say it's very interesting. So I remember that that was like part of the quote. So I think that, again, maybe he could be doing it because, like every other president, they're asked by their family and by all, so many people, that it's probably something that's like back in their minds, kind of thing. So if they were starting to think about, could he disclose when he got in? I don't even remember if he was in or not at the time, because it was about a year ago, this thing. But anyways, I just remembered that. And the other thing is yeah, absolutely, the complexity issue. I think that, and this ties in with the legacy program, like the Age of Disclosure movie that we, talked about before, how, a lot of people say that the legacy program, a lot of those people are, very Christian, very, like eschatologists, where they're really thinking that if it's disclosed, or if everyone knows that it's what they think is angels or demons, that this could potentially collapse like society. And that, I don't know 100% what they think, but I know that that's one thing, is that, like, so in my perspective, I would say that there used to be, in the olden days, like there used to be like more of a medieval belief system where it's like angels or demons, the phenomena. And then in like the Cold War era, say, then they started saying that it was like experiencers and maybe ETs kind of, thing. And now that we're more in like a digital slash AI kind of age, it's like now everyone, the thought has changed to like interdimensionals, or like the mirror perspective that we talk about, right? That the phenomena is just a mirror, or especially if you talk about the simulation is literally just a reflection, like a literal reflection of whatever you think, that's what you see back. So I do think that it's so insanely complicated. Who was that, Lekatsky, that said that it's so
Yeah,
complicated
yeah,
that,
Lekatsky, and he
yeah,
ran
so
the program,
eh,
the UFO program.
yeah, and I think that that's really it, that, even to disclose that it's angels or demons would be hard enough, or experiencers or aliens. But now I think that we're at the point where it's so, even a lot of people understand what it could be, and which is that a reflective, phenomena, or interdimensional or something like that. So I think that it's so insanely complex that would really melt the brains of a lot of, normal people who never even think about this kind of stuff, because that is like, off the charts. That would be really, really hard for them to be able to disclose it. So I don't think it's going to come. Even if he says release the files, I can't even imagine how they would come close to being able to even explain what I'm sure that they don't know. But I think that complexity part is a big thing too. And I just wanted to, I'll finish with, because I am still like looking into the GATE program and psychic abilities and the MK Ultra thing for my book. So I just heard a clip from Danny Sheehan, just like, I don't know, a couple weeks ago or something, where he was on a podcast, and they asked him what, if he knew about the GATE program, and what he thought about that and psychic abilities, and what the GATE program could have been about. And he actually said, remember the Roswell crash in 1947? He said there was a helmet that was associated with that craft, and they were trying to get pilots, Air Force pilots, to be able to use this helmet, get into the craft, and be able to try flying the craft. And he said that it killed some of the pilots. He said they were so left-brained and analytical that they were literally the opposite of what was needed for the craft, and so some of them died trying to fly it. And that's when they brought in the children, and because the children's minds are more flexible and more right brain. He didn't say that part, he didn't say right brain, but because they're more open or whatever, and right brain, he says they were getting close to it, and the children were actually able to use this helmet. And the strange thing for me that he said was, because we know about the pink drink, and like a missing time and all this stuff, and like what were they trying to do in this GATE program. And he said, and I would say it's trauma. It's all trauma based and dissociation based. But the funny thing is, what Danny said is that they found that when the kids were very stressed, that it would work better. So they were giving children amphetamines to try increasing their stress level because that was the thing that was making the helmet work more and making the craft actually be able to fly. And he actually said that some of the children died in this process of them trying to. So I was shocked that he even said any of that, but also, just to say what you were saying about how you actually fly the craft and how complex that part of it is as well. So how they would never be able to disclose something like that. Because I'm surprised Danny's even saying that. But the fact is, if they were trying to use ESP in some of these programs, most of the planet doesn't even believe that ESP exists. Never mind that the government is drugging children and using some helmet in 1947 when they were saying that it was an air balloon, and they were actually drugging kids and trying to get them to fly the ship around. So I think that, like what you said, that ESP and the psychic part of it is the whole backbone or the foundation to this whole entire thing. And most people don't even believe that part of it. So how would they ever be able to disclose that there's interdimensionals and that, ESP has something to do with how, the beings fly the ship or how humans could potentially be able to move the craft and stuff?
Wow. You and I were talking about doing an update to the UFO Sky Pilot. So we wrote a whole book on flying the craft and stuff. And I came up with all this new material. And then you did the gate program stuff. And that made me remember Jim Semivan, who is another high level official who had the beings in his room and talked about the being behind him and all this kind of telepathic stuff. And he got a briefing, a 7 hour briefing inside the CIA, he said, by people who had as many clearance tickets as he had. And he said he had all the tickets. These guys had the tickets, but they were experts on the subject. And he said after he came out, he said he walked around for 3 months and he was totally blown away by what he'd seen. And this guy ran covert ops for the CIA. He was like the James running the James Bond people for the CIA. And so he would see all sorts of weird stuff. And his wife would say, "Are you okay, Jim?" He'd walk around in this daze. And they said, "Would you like another briefing?" He said, "No, I've seen enough. I don't want to see anymore." So you take a look at how he reacted to what the actual truth of what they knew, not what they knew. But he was asked, what did they get on UFOs? And he said, nothing. Nothing. He said, and this is why people should all go to the Eureka Springs conference to hear Desta, because Desta's on this, talking about the GATE program. He said, all the psi stuff is real. And he said, it's what? And he said it was like they went through like science fiction. This works. This is real. This is real. This is real. And they've been working in the psi stuff. He said they've got nothing on UFOs. They couldn't figure out anything. But the psi stuff, they had developed a lot of this stuff, and it just blew Jim Semivan away. So that we've got a lot of material that we didn't have in the when we did the UFO Sky Pilot. There's been a bunch of people came forward, a bunch of new material, and I think we've got a lot of interesting stuff talked about by people who actually claim that they have interacted with the craft, they've flown the craft, or they've had these near-death experiences which are almost identical. And it leads you to believe, it leads you to understand that maybe this is all in a different sort of realm, that you're in a realm where the dead people live and the UFO people live and stuff. It's just a higher vibration that you're in. And it's caused by dissociation and stuff like that. So I'd like to find this Danny Sheen interview, because that's extremely interesting, because it's something I've been saying for years, where a young kid, their left brain doesn't come online till they're about 7 years old. And if you stress people, you know that you can form dissociation. So these kids would naturally be able to do stuff that adults wouldn't do, because adults have a mindset. They're much more conservative. They're much more left brain. They've been taught in school rational analytical thinking and stuff like that. And if you get them before there, so I'm interested to see maybe where Danny gets that stuff, because when he mentioned the headband, if you remember, the first woman that ever talked to me that I thought was going to throw out of the house, I thought she was insane when she told me she was flying the craft. She was in her 70s. She talked about that in an interview we did with Mark Olson with the Winnipeg group. We interviewed her when she was in the hospice, when she was dying, and she told us that about the band, that they started with this one band when she was a little kid, and then they went to a smaller band, and then they could do it. She could fly the craft without the band. And so interesting that Danny Sheehan would come up with the same thing about the band, because that seems to be a critical factor that people don't realize, is that this whole phenomena is much more mental than people think it is. And that when you come right down to it, you and I know, if you read the holographic universe, that there really is no physical universe. It's just a bunch of waves. It's all vibration. It's things vibrating, and our eyes and our ears or brain all put it together to form this conscious world that has color, but there is no color. There is not, none of this stuff exists. It's all this vibration stuff. And that's where I think gradually you have to take people. You can't, as Jim Semivan said, you got these people, and then you're going to drop this shit on them. He said, "You're going to drop this shit on them," and because he said there does not appear to be any there. And I ask every interview, I said, "What do you think he's saying? What does he mean when he says there does not appear to be any there?" And it's this whole idea that it's much more weird. So we're on the trip. It's this gradual thing where we've made a lot of headway since 1975, since 2017. It's gone like almost like the Trump world, where every day there's a new story, a new event happening, and it's moving at the speed of light. And I think you and I are on the leading edge, that a lot of people are doing interviews still about the nuts and bolts. They haven't even caught up. We're on the leading edge of, I believe, what actually is the truth story of what UFOs are all about. So let's leave it at that, and we'll do another legacy files for maybe next weekend, where I'll talk about the FOIAs. I'll list all the FOIAs I did with the Trump administration. I'll talk about the briefing that I was asked to participate with the Trump administration, who that was, because that's a guy, Larry Fischella, his name has never been thrown around. I'll talk a little bit about him and his position and his what he did. The guy that identified indirectly who Jim Semivan was back in 2016 when I first identified Jim Semivan. So we'll go through all that. That's pretty interesting when you see the FOIAs. How many, like Chris Bledsoe, they have files on Chris Bledsoe, Tim Taylor. We'll go through all the files, and I even asked for the Epstein files. I've been fighting back and forth, and this morning I see they didn't reject it. So apparently they may have taken my new wording for the Epstein files that I've requested from. And I just do it like throwing darts at a board. It's like I'm probably not going to read the stuff. I just let's ask him this question. That's like almost like what Trump's facing now. He's going to face all these crazy questions that people dream up and they want answered. And that's what you do with FOIs. You just put in the FOI, and how many times did he meet this person? How many times did he meet that person? And you never know. You make him up with a really weird story that nobody's ever heard before. So let's leave it at that. And thank you to everybody for taking time to listen. And if you have any questions, and especially if you've got some stuff on the GATE program, send along, because Des is doing research on that. Or if you've flown the craft, contact us on that, because we're going to add a few more. The people that have come and talked about flying the craft is not as important as it was before. It was really important before, because nobody had ever heard about flying the craft. So it was something that you couldn't have made up, because you couldn't have heard it someplace, because it wasn't anywhere. And we were the first to pick up on that. But now there's a lot of people who are coming forward and saying, me too. So we may include some of those people in this update to UFO sky pilots.
Sounds good. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Nesta.